So if you practice that dungeon a lot, you can just not ban it and beat the opposite team in that very game. So it could be a strategy to run.
Right, and speaking of strategies, we're ready.
So we see both teams already doing a very big pull at the start here, but interesting to see that Goosy Bad is running a rogue here, so no double DK on their side.
Yeah, so the no rogue, I mean, we've seen that a lot from a lot of teams. I mean, the double DK Demon Hunter is what we saw from Method today, and so we know it's a totally fine comp. It all comes down to being able to use the Shadow Meld skip instead of just using the Shroud instead, and being able to actually actively CC mobs without having all that extra help that rogue brings in that department. So as long as you're able to do that, you should be totally fine. But as we know, it takes a lot of, a lot of synergy and a lot of practice to get those pulls down without having that extra rogue CC. So we're gonna have to see if they're able to do that on the side of Big Numb Gaming. But already early on, more trash count on the board. They saved Bloodlust for the Tyrannical boss, so they're getting on quite fine with this comp so far.
Yeah, and they actually Bloodlust in a trash pull here, interestingly enough, and they're down to trash pack a lot earlier than the Bloodlust timer, so that's why they immediately engaged the boss as well to get some extra time there. And the army by the DK was saved for the boss as well. So interesting to see that they're doing 2 trash pulls here on their side, while most other teams we've seen so far have done 1 trash pull and then straight went into the boss straight away afterwards. But 21% on their trash counter now on Goosy Bad's side, while Big Numb Gaming is only in 15%. So there's going to be a little bit of trash they have to make up on their side.
Yeah, but as we know, there's a ton of trash available in this dungeon, especially like we saw with Method in it. You can pull a lot of it into bosses and get that cleave on, which we're going to see them doing with that double unholy DK. So it makes sense for them to want to do a little bit less trash earlier on in this dungeon, just for the extra added efficiency. I'm interested to see, whether or not Goosy Bad or the vodka team. Every time I say that name, it just feels a little weird. It's such a weird team name. It's like one of the plays on one of those teams that we saw from the Australian teams, Free Marzi, Free Pumps. They're just talking about a player for some reason, for fun, little inside jokes. But yeah, this is a bunch of vodka players, a bunch of friends in the NA scene. I'm interested to see if they're going to be able to, make up for pull size running only 1 unholy DK. They're definitely going to lose that on AoE damage, but we're seeing already on the side of Big Numb Gaming, trying to make those double unholy DK works. The Demon Hunter already went down. That's the battle res off the board. And he died again.
Oh, he's going down again. This is such an interesting pull to see here from their side, as they were pulling the maggot pack with all the small adds that explode on death. And this is why I think most of the teams skip this trash pack, just because it does so much damage, on top of also having the maggots that you have to deal with. But they managed to get it down, even with 2 deaths on the Demon Hunter. Now, thankfully, the DKs are not the ones that went down, because those are the ones that do the most of the AoE damage, and therefore they didn't manage to finish off the pull. Now they're moving on to a second trash pull, and it definitely seems like those 2 teams are doing it a little bit smaller compared to Method and A, who were just pulling everything with the buff.
It makes you wonder if they even needed to use the battle res there, because the trash pack melted without the Demon Hunter. The Demon Hunter got like his 1 AoE, got his 1 death sweep in to put the magic damage taking debuff on everything, and then just instantly, they didn't need to use their battle res there. Although I guess they didn't really know that, so a little bit unfortunate that they committed their battle res to that, and they just don't have one of those available for another 6.5 minutes. So if they have any deaths on these Tyrannical bosses, it's gonna cost them a lot of time over the course of the rest of the dungeon, or for the next 6 minutes, like I mentioned earlier. So we'll have to see if that's going to be something that, bites them later on. Of course, Goosy Bad still doesn't have the battle res on their side, and they're just kind of trucking along slowly in terms of trash percentage. So we'll have to see, at this point, that battle res is the major difference between them. We already know what kind of pulls that we're going to see out of Big Numb Gaming. But like you mentioned, they're also not going for the big pulls, and they're also just having more problems with the trash as their healers and one of their DKs go down, and this is just going to be a full team wipe. I don't think Senecta is going to be able to finish off that trash pack on his own, although he's surely given it a good try.
Yeah, so it looked like their cooldowns were down for this pull, and then it seemed like a maggot cast, a frontal cast, actually went off and killed 2 players here, one of them being the healer, and with no battle res available, as you mentioned. They did manage to finish it off with the tank being the only one alive here, but it's going to cost them so much time now. Not only the deaths, but they also need to walk all the way back, because of course the warrior does not have a rest out of combat rest, so they need to walk back, losing even more time. And something I actually want to mention, if you run this double DK comp, it seems like, the more you pull, it actually is easier to pull more because of the quadratic scaling that the DK has. that if you do a pull without the cooldown strategy, then you have to deal with all of these mechanics like the Maggot cast and the Lasher cast and the Bloodswarmers without having your cooldowns available and without not having a lot of utility to deal with those casts because they don't have a rogue on their team, right? So if you pull more, like when you have your cooldowns up, you can just ignore all of those mechanics because you do so much damage that everything dies before a mechanic comes off. And that's why it seems like an interesting thing to do that they're not doing as big of a pull as Method and A did.
Yeah, that's the major takeaway, right? They're doing smaller pulls in Method and A and having less, having more issues than Method and A did in their actual run. So interesting to see if they'll, go on and pull bigger pulls later on and try to take advantage of this unholy DKs. But something else that we're seeing as well is Goosy Bad also just pulled a bunch of trash into boss, and they're doing it yet again as well. And this is something that we haven't seen Big Dumb Gaming do yet. They just did 2 big pulls not pulling with the boss. So, Goosy Bad, not only are they being more efficient with their pulls, but they're also not having any deaths at all. 0 deaths on the board for them still. It's a clean run so far. And so far, they're looking quite good in this dungeon.
Yeah, definitely very clean on their side. And one thing to note as well is that they're running a rogue, so the pulls that Big Dumb Gaming is doing, I feel like if they had a rogue, those pulls would be better just because the rogue provides so much control. They have so much single target stun, single target interrupts, sap and so on, gouge, to interrupt all of those Maggot casts, the Lasher casts, and so on, and to deal with the Bloodswarmers as well. Hante unfortunately going down for Goosy Bad here. They do immediately get the rest up from the DK, so they should be able to recover here, but going down in a tantrum.
Yeah, a little unfortunate for them. They did have the battle res to get him up a bit right away, and it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on again as well. Of course, it'll be about 3.5 minutes before the battle res is up for both teams here. They will very likely get the next tantrum as well, as we see Yips dropping incredibly low and getting that monk bubble. But this is going to be scary. Someone pointed out saying spooky a lot earlier, and let's be honest, there are a lot of spooky things happening, but this is once again going to be a scary moment for Team Goosy Bad here as they go into this last tantrum that they're going to get here. And Hante is on low mana, about 10% here, so if they're able to stay alive through this tantrum, they'll get Kragma down no problem and be able to move on, but we'll see if they're able to pull it off.
More problems on Big Dumb Gaming side as well as they lose one of their DKs here early on Kragma, so they don't have a battle res to get them back up, meaning they will have to 4-man the rest of this boss fight. To be honest, I feel like since this is a tyrannical environment, I feel like they should have just been resetting the boss because it was so early. It was like 90%. I think you lose less time resetting and just trying again with everyone alive. But maybe they just had a call to just keep going, and you're just gonna stick to the call even if you think there might be a different call that is better. If someone calls something, you just like keep on doing it, and we'll see how it goes for the rest of the fight as the Goosy Bad is already moving.
Yeah, I mean, every extra second of combat you stay with the boss is more of a committing to what you're doing, and the more you commit, the more time you're wasting by resetting the boss. So it looks like they're just full committing to try to 4-man this boss because they are already behind in the dungeon and they need to kill us as quickly as possible. So completely agree with everything you've said. We're seeing similar pulls to Method and A on the side of Goosy Bad here with the Spore Collar. They pulled pretty much all of the trash in between Kragma's room and Spore Collar, and they're cleaving it down with this Unholy DK, who, surprisingly enough, is doing enough damage on his own. You don't really need to have the 2 DKs to pull off this strategy, but of course it makes it a little bit more clean and the trash dies a little quicker. They only have 1 trash pack left in the form of that Reanimated Guardian, and then they'll be done with all of the trash, and we'll likely see them use that revival strategy we saw from Method and A, where that once again they don't bother clearing out all these mushrooms and they just instantly cast revival right after he casts his Festering Harvest to instantly remove all the debuffs from their players.
That was actually a little bit scary on the tank on Goosy Bad's side because one of the Death Speakers actually casted the Wicked Frenzy, which puffs the Guardian with an Enrage effect, and each auto attack on the aggro target will leave a magic debuff behind that ticks for a lot of damage. And they don't have an Enrage dispel, so they don't have a Hunter or a Druid to get rid of it. And Yips had this debuff on him, on top of also getting the Shockwave from Sancha here on a Tyrannical environment, and it almost got him down here, but they did have defensives available and did manage to recover from there.
Yeah, again, scary moments from both teams here. As you said, mentioned Yips got put to like 10% from one of those slams there, but was instantly healed up by Hante as well. Big Dumb Gaming slowly chipping away at Kragma here. It looks like they're going to be able to get through this boss with just 4 players alive. They're probably going to get 1 more tantrum, but it looks like Bay has plenty of mana to heal them through that, so they should be totally fine there. Anarchy got hit by one of those orbs, just barely clipped and ended up taking a debuff, but looks like he's going to be totally fine. Didn't even proc the cheat death on their side, and both of these teams are just slowly whittling down these final bosses. We do see a couple of trash mobs pulled on top of Spore Collar Zancha at the last moment here. for Goosy Bad, just getting a little bit of extra trash percentage here. And as we know, they're going to have to pull about 15 to 20% more after this boss as well, just in order to unlock that door to the final boss of the dungeon. So we're going to have to see what they end up pulling there. But things going well for Goosy Bad here.
Yeah, so Big Dumb Gaming, they have now Battle Rest available again, and I almost feel like they should use it if they get another Tantrum, because their healer is so low on mana and they get so many ticks spawning. So at this point, I would say play it safe and get the Battle Rest up, because if they wipe here, it's gonna be over for them, because they lost so much time if this is not gonna go well.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is, you know, you would think that these teams would keep an eye on where their opponents are in the dungeon, just to kind of have an idea of, you know, how far ahead they are. But at the same time, you also kind of want to make sure that your strategy is clean and you're not wiping to some of these bigger pulls. So I can see arguments for going for this for Goosy Bad. You know, they probably know that they're a full boss ahead right now, and they're as well as a little bit of trash percentage ahead. But just getting comfortable with your strategy, especially in a tournament environment where everything's on the line, this is definitely a big confidence booster for a team like this, who's relatively new as a team to the MDI. These guys have all played in some form before, but not together as this particular team. So knowing that their team synergy is down and they can get this strategy down with no wipes and just one death on the board is definitely going to be a big confidence booster going into the next couple of games here, and also matches later on in the tournament.
Yeah, I agree, but it seems like Goosy Bad does not have enough percentage with these two mobs here, so they'll have to pull something on top of this as they now engage the Sporer here. It is a teaming environment, so each mob is worth a little bit less percentage than usual, and here in Underrot, unfortunately, you need to reach 100% trash before you can access the last boss. Ooh. Unfortunately, Big Dumb Gaming loses their tank. They do have the Battle Rest available, but it seems like they just reset the boss anyway. And
even if they reset the boss, they have to finish off both of these reanimated Guardians here, which can be dangerous in and of itself, but yeah, that's just, you know, extra time lost from them there. They don't have a battle res. They just have to reawaken him with the Mistweaver Monk and then get back to it once he respawns. But Goosy Bad already finished their 100% trash count off, like we mentioned earlier, and they're going to be moving on to the final boss, where they also have some awakened mobs awaiting them, but they have their Bloodlust available, which is something we didn't see from Method and A earlier on. A little bit of a difference in strategy. Method and A also, like we were talking about earlier, they saved their first Bloodlust to that first Kragmaw rune pull, where they pulled about 2/3 of the room with Kragmaw. And I just think, even though you only get really one efficient lust off in the dungeon, you save so much time with that one Bloodlust usage that it just seems like it's a faster strategy in general. And yeah, looks like it. Still an impressive run from Goosy Bad, though.
I agree. Well, Method and A had a 13:49 total time, so probably gonna be faster than Goosy Bad, as they still have to finish off this Tyrannical boss fight, and it takes quite a long time, this Unbound Abomination, especially if you have to deal with the Awakened mobs before. But one thing I wanted to mention, because a lot of people have asked about the corruption that those people are running, and a lot of people ask, why aren't they running Twilight Devastation? Because on live servers everyone wants Twilight Death, but here a lot of damage healers / healers and even tanks are not running it. And a big reason why is because the trash already dies anyway to all the AoE you have, but it's a single target that needs to be better, because if you have Unholy DKs, they're just gonna nuke everything down in a couple of seconds. Then it's really the single target damage that you want to increase, and that's why a lot of people are running Gushing Wounds or stat increase to just increase their focus target, priority target damage.
Yep, and while we were talking, just more mistakes coming out of Big Dumb Gaming. Shem now down for them, and they're going to have to end up formatting yet another boss from about half HP, so just too many small mistakes chipping away at them in this dungeon to really put up any sort of a fight for them, whereas Goosy Bad is pretty much putting together a textbook dungeon that really competes with some of the best teams that we've seen so far, and if they continue to play like this, they'll be a big competitor, you know, throughout this entire MDI. Really interested to see how this team ends up playing out for the rest of the dungeons today and tomorrow as well, as it seems like they're going to be a team that we're going to see a lot of.
I agree, they're doing a really good job, and only one death as well, so very clean run by them, even though I think the double DK really is the go-to strat, or should be the strat here to run in this Underrot, just because we've seen Method and A perform so well on it. But let's be honest, even with the Rogue here, so a lot less AoE burst than the double DK strategy, they still have a pretty good time, as you can see on the total timer here. They're about to finish off this boss, and it's going to be under 15 minutes for a 19 Tyrannical Underrot. So definitely still a very, very impressive time by Goosy here as well.
Ooh, it's gonna be close to sub 15. We'll have to see. If they didn't have the death, it would for sure be sub 15. But we're gonna have to wait for these blood visages to spawn as well once they get to this final health bar. But what is for sure is that Goosy is gonna be taking this first game and going up 1-0 in the series. And we've already talked about them enough, I think. But these guys are looking really good. And honestly, looking at the caliber of player they have a lot of the players in their team were part of the rank 1 IO team at the end of last year. And on top of that, they've got Yips, who in and of himself is a multi-clad player as well. So a lot of history on these guys, and good first run from Goosy.
That's right, and great to be able to see what these guys are really capable of as Goosy takes game number 1 in the Underrot over BDG. So at that point, Dranos, what do you think you liked and didn't like compared to Method NA's performance in this dungeon?
Yeah, so Goosy I think their pulls were a little bit more conservative than Method NA's. They did the dungeon in more total pulls, but things were looking pretty controlled from them. It looked like they were doing a good job of actually, like, the damage coming out from their rogue, I think, is among the highest we've seen a rogue do in a dungeon this MDI cycle. Rogue has in most of this weekend and last weekend, we saw rogues generally being the 3rd place on the damage meters, but Anarchy was often at the top of those meters there, so putting up a really impressive performance on a spec that, is mostly there for the utility that it brings rather than its damage.
Yeah, and with that, they do take game number 1, and it'll also start having us start looking at what else these guys are going to be running, as Workshop looks like we're going to be going into the next dungeon here in Nagura. So again, time trial dungeon where Goosy had about a 3-minute lead over their opponents.
Yeah, so 3-minute lead, but doesn't mean anything really. Maybe Big Dumb Gaming actually increased or bettered their strategy in these couple of days that they had to practice. Both of them actually running a similar comp, both of them running a mage, so we'll see how that goes. And then the Holy Paladin as well, coming out of Big Dumb Gaming, as we've seen the Holy Paladin already played before. Unfortunately, that team lost that was playing the Holy Paladin, but maybe they can prove us otherwise this time around and make that Holy Paladin work in that dungeon.
We'll have to see. Now, Dranos, you're talking about some of the differences in conservative versus more aggressive pulls. Let's dive into that a little bit more deeply here.
Yeah, so at the very start of the dungeon, we had some different pulls coming out from the teams. They got to Elderly Axel in a different amount of time. Big Dumb Gaming rather, got there a little bit faster in a little bit fewer pulls. But that eventually caught up to them. They started to have problems. Really where things started to go wrong for them was at the very first pull after that first boss. Their DH died twice, consuming one of their battle reses, which is their only battle res for most of the dungeon. And that was something that really set them back, because then when things started to go wrong later, they didn't have access to that battle res. And with a double DK comp, one of your strengths is that you have 2 instant cast battle reses available. But with that shared cooldown resource exhausted, they were in a lot of trouble very quickly. And that's when things kind of spiraled out of control for BDG. Meanwhile, Goosy they also had some things go a little bit wrong for them. Hunte died on their Kragmaw fight, but they were able to recover from that, even though they had a death during the tantrum, which is really impressive showing, I think, coming out from them. They're being able to recover in the middle of such a high damage Tyrannical boss encounter. Very good play.
Yeah, and it really goes to show, how teams are going to be able to adapt and how they're going to be able to respond when there is increased pressure on them, when there is that greater threat for them to be able to perform. And, you talked about it a number of times, Zyro, where those critical moments were in each dungeon that they had to face against, and whether or not they'd be able to recover or not.
Yeah, that's really the major point of the MDI. It's not necessarily always going to be how well to your best can you play. Generally speaking, these teams both teams will almost always make some sort of mistake in the dungeon, and a lot of it comes down to how much of an impact that mistake makes on your play. If it's a quick death during a pull that you can instantly battle res up and then kind of recover from there, that's a lot more impressive than, in my opinion, than having just a full clean run throughout, because it shows how good your players are at making on-the-fly decisions and reacting to that, and being able to continue playing even though a mistake was made and not having it tilt you at all. So really what it comes down to, I think, is your mentality as a team and how you can fix mistakes rather than hoping that you never make a mistake and then letting it fall apart when you make the mistake.
And we've seen a number of times where being able to spectate in on some of the players in practice and watching them start making cascading mistakes and say, okay, well, what do we do after we die here? What do we do if we don't have CDs here? How do they start finding the areas that are absolutely critical Like, what cooldowns do we need in order to pull this off? What defensives do we need in order to pull this off? And that's always been one of the most interesting things for years now for Mechagon is what are these guys doing to adapt? And Workshop as well, that we'll be going into next, is always interesting because it is one of the newer dungeons to Mythic Plus.
Yeah, especially when there's a new dungeon, there might be some scenario happening that you never had happen before, and then it's going to be interesting to see how those teams adapt to that very thing happening, right? The good teams, they will be the ones who can adapt quickly and actually change their route and change their strategy depending on what happened, right? We've seen teams have multiple deaths on both sides already before, and the team that can actually change their route accordingly and move their cooldown usage around the way they didn't plan on doing it without any wives, that's going to be the team that actually wins that dungeon and that match, and that's just so important for these runs as we mentioned before.
That's right, and we're getting ourselves ready for the Workshop, and Tyrannical, Explosive, and Grievous are going to be the affixes that we'll have to deal with here. Now, walk me through this a little bit, Dranos. Why have we been seeing some groups bringing a mage, and why have they not for this dungeon?
Well, a mage is something that we actually saw out of both of these teams from their time trial runs in this dungeon. On Tyrannical in particular, it's really nice in Workshop because these boss fights are pretty tough, and they often last long enough, especially like King Mechagon, where you might even be able to get a second combustion. And if that is the case, then you're going to do tremendous amounts of damage to those boss fights. But also just the dungeon doesn't really have the opportunity to do multiple back-to-back big pulls, where normally that's a fire mage weakness, where you'd have these cases where you have to, adjust what you're doing to make combustion work. Not really something that you run into with such a linear dungeon as Workshop here. So that was why I think we saw a lot of mages in those time trials. But again, we saw Method and A deciding that they didn't need one. And it looks like Goosy Bad, even though they decided to play one in their time trial, have updated their composition now, and they're also not running a mage as we get here to this actual tournament match.
That's right, and let's see how that impacts them and see how it changes around some of their strategies as game number 2 goes on between Goosy Bad and BDG.
Seems like they also switched away from the Holy Paladin on Big Dumb Gaming side, so they definitely changed their strategy coming from the time trials. Of course, they had to change the strategy because if they're just going to run the same time, we know that Goosy Bad has a faster time. Hante, unfortunately, going down here for Goosy Bad side, but immediately releasing, and he should be fine, the rest of his team. But yeah, already 2 deaths here on Goosy Bad side.
Yeah, the 2 deaths are unfortunate to see from them, but also an interesting strategy from them as well. They opted not to pull the trash to one of those hammers to help them with the damage. Instead, what they were doing is they made sure everyone stacked right on top of a very tight stack of those tanks. And of course, if they get hit by their own rocket barrage, they do a massive amount of damage to themselves. Problem is, you also take a massive amount of damage if you're standing in them too, and it looks like that's what happened to them. A couple people just got hit by one too many of those and went down. And they're ending up pulling the boss at pretty much the exact same point. So, little unfortunate from them. 2 deaths on the board. That's going to put them 10 seconds behind in general, and yeah, just not the greatest start for Goosy Bad. But I'm interested to see, why did they swap off the mage here? It seems like mage is a good pick in general, but I guess just more consistent single target coming out of the hunters, maybe? But you can see the mage is doing work right now for Big Dumb Gaming.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Demon Hunter going down on Big Dumb Gaming's side, they did need to use the Engineering Battle Res on the mage, so fortunately it was already after his cooldowns were over, after his combustion, so mages outside of the cooldowns can definitely use the time to get that Battle Res out and not going to lose out on too much damage. But yeah, unfortunately for both teams already having some problems here at the start. And you see it, if you look at the bosses percentage, they're both very close to one another, as Big Dumb Gaming does now finish off No Mercy. Yeah,
and also using that hammer there as well to do a little bit of extra damage. Every single time that hammer slams down, it's a tiny bit of damage to everything that's hit by it, including both of the bosses. So using that to great effectiveness, actually propelling them ahead of Big Dumb Gaming even after that burst from the mage on their side. Also of note, Anarchy is doing some damage compared to Ja here, just doing about 30k more DPS. So just the individual player's skill. Yeah, also Ja went down. Skill with quotation marks, probably has a whole bunch of Lash of the Void procs. Wouldn't be surprised to see that at the top of his damage meter here. Gotta love corruption sometimes, but RNG is RNG. That's the way of the game sometimes.
Yeah, all those Twilight Death procs, all skill, right?
Yeah.
As we see Goosy Bad moving on, we'll see how they pull this trash here. Now we've seen multiple different strategies already. A lot of the teams were skipping this first trash back here and then pulling the rest of the trash on top of the boss. And they were using the boxes that the boss spawns to line of sight the explosion from the living waste here. We'll see what Goosy does as they get a lot of explosives spawn here.
But they're just going to easily line of sight all of them. You know, same thing they're doing with the living waste here. That's something we saw from Method in A as well, and I think that's just something a lot of teams have kind of prepared themselves to do there. Just pulling everything as much as possible, quickly AoEing it down so that you can time those explosive spawns with the wastes also dying at the same time. Seeing the exact same thing from Big Dumb Gaming as well, albeit a lot less successful as Ja goes down once again. Looks like he went down to that process waste, which is the frontal from those units, and you know, as you and I both know, those can be a little weird to deal with sometimes. Sometimes they'll face one way and just do a quick 90-degree turn and hit you in the face.
Yeah, that's definitely unfortunate, especially if you have to be the melee here, while the mage and the hunter can just stand on range and deal with it a lot easier, as we see Goosy already fighting the boss here. They also have some trash that they pulled on top of it, so they get ahead in percentage here just in a second as those trash mobs go down. Big Dumb Gaming, on the other hand, they had to wait for the demon hunter to come back because they didn't have a battle rest available, and now they're engaging the boss fight, so definitely a little bit behind now compared to Goosy
Yeah, I mean, really what it comes down to is when those deaths were, right? The 2 deaths for Goosy were out of boss combat, and easily they could just run right back before the bosses spawn, so not that big of a deal for them. But both of the deaths so far for Big Dumb Gaming have come right before or during boss combat in situations where they couldn't really release and run back quickly, so it's really cost them a lot of time, and you can see that difference right there just on the board for them. Goosy already got it down to 45%, whereas Big Dumb Gaming is pretty consistently 25 to 30% behind. And you got to remember, these are tyrannical bosses. These bosses have a ton of HP, so that's a lot of that's a huge chunk of HP that Big Dumb Gaming's going to have to come back from.
Yeah, and we see both hunters, or all 3 hunters actually, doing that trick with the Feign Death for the lead. We've seen both teams actually pull it off. And we also see the same trick as we talked about earlier, where you go to the edge of the box to still actually be able to cast on the boss while not being line of sight for the AoE to not hit you. So both doing a really good job, and we see Hyper Mage here probably having his combustion up as he was jumping in place. That's the only way that you can use your combustion, of course.
Well, to be fair, there are 2 ways. Jumping is the correct way. It's the best way to do it, but you can also go for the Tokyo Drift, the little back and forth left and right. And a lot of people ask when you're playing a mage, why do mages all jump when they combust? There's actually a reason for it. When you have that much haste, especially during your lucid dreams, during your combustion, you're pretty much spamming Pyroblast consistently, so much so and with so much haste that sometimes your character will just start to hard cast a Pyroblast, which is a big damage loss. It triggers your GCD, and it's not something that you ever want to do. So if you're jumping midair, you'll never start hard casting. And of course, while I'm mentioning that, we have disaster on the side of Big Dumb Gaming. 3 players down. There's absolutely no way they're going to finish this boss off. It's going to be a full team wipe for Big Dumb Gaming. And Hyper Mage, the last one alive. Jumping isn't going to help you finish off 20% of a Tyrannical boss on your own, buddy.
What happened? This is a very interesting boss fight to wipe on, I believe. And I mean, I feel like the only thing that can really wipe you here is if you get hit by the AoE because you were trying to min-max the line of sight, maybe getting a cast off. But it seems like everyone just died at once. Maybe they got hit by an explosion from one of the boxes. Either way, this seems like a very unlikely thing to happen. We'll have to talk about it later with the teams. But yeah, this is going to cost them so much time. They have to re-engage the boss fight. They already have those 7 deaths, and they probably used cooldowns as well. So yeah, huge disaster here for Big Dumb Gaming.
Yeah, I mean, that's just about the worst wipe you can possibly have in one of these MTI dungeons. A Tyrannical boss sub 20%. You know, that's at least 2 minutes of your time just gone. So Goosy very in the lead now. They were already in the lead coming into this boss, but now they've just, you know, the whole dungeon's wide open ahead of them now, and they're just, you know, all eyes are on them. They have to make the mistakes now, and they can take it nice and easy and finish it off.
Yeah, and when I mention one thing about the hunters here, because we've seen specifically hunters being played here in Workshop, and a reason why that is because their single target damage is actually so high, and they also scale really well with corruption. And on a tournament realm, you can pick and choose the corruption you want to use. So they're just going with the crit corruption, basically just making it so you have very consistent damage as a hunter, because with your crit you just get bestial wrath, cooldown reduction, and then you have your cooldowns up more often, you basically just have perma cooldowns up, and that's really important for single target damage, especially in a dungeon like Workshop, where you constantly just have your cooldowns up to get those single target mobs down.
Not to mention, the best Azerite trait they have as a damage is called Dance with Death, and the higher crit chance you have, the more chance it has to proc, which and it's a massive proc. We're talking something like 10,000-11,000 agility. So the more crit you have, the higher percent chance you have to have that full uptime, and you know, you can see what that does to hunters. They get to absolutely pop off with damage, and it's pretty ridiculous, you know, what they can do when they have something like 70 or 80% crit baseline.
Yeah, and that's why also always thought that the Mistweaver, not only is the Mistweaver there because Mistweaver is just very good for MDI kind of style pulls anyway, but it also gives you the physical damage buff, which is very convenient for the hunters as well. So that's why probably we also saw Big Dumb Gaming switch from the Holy Paladin back to the Mistweaver, because it just boosts your damage overall. While Paladin might be useful for certain utilities, but the Holy Paladin not being able to be a Night Elf, so missing out on the Shadow Melt, and also missing out on this physical damage buff, is just a damage loss for your whole group, and that's maybe why we also see Big Dumb Gaming switch to the Mistweaver here.
Yep, and we're seeing a similar pull like what Method and A did with this trash pack here, pulling it into Headmuck and this Spark Flux, of course, this third boss of the dungeon, but a little bit of a different execution-wise. When we saw Method and A do this pull, the only person that came out from the Nyalotha realm was the tank, so that he could be the only one that even possibly gets aggro on everything. We saw Team Goosy Bad, everyone came out from the realm, instantly started attacking the trash, probably got both misdirects from the hunters as well, and then started attacking the boss. And I think that's just something that's a little bit less efficient than what we saw from Method and A. Of course, it could be Yips maybe not being as familiar with tanking here, maybe thinking he needs the healer to help him keep alive. Of course, Yips is a DPS main as well. He doesn't normally main tank on live, so that could be something as well that plays into it. But just seeing like similar pulls but different setups for the pulls is really interesting, just in terms of difference between these top teams.
Yeah, and you just saw how difficult it is to pull trash on top of this boss here on Goosy Bad's side, because the beam was actually dividing them and the mobs at the same time. Now, thankfully, you have two ranged DPS who can still DPS, but with explosive in combination with this boss and having so much trash at the same time, if the trash is not moving immediately, which some mobs like to do, for example, if you have casters, they just don't like moving with the tank, they just like to stand still, cast a little bit and then move, and then you get those explosives spawn with the trash and you're divided by the beam. So definitely the job of the hunters here to finish off those explosives while the melee can't reach it, and that's why these kind of pulls can be very dangerous, on top of also having Grievous, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, the single target damage coming out from Team Goosy Bad with this comp is pretty ridiculous. This boss is getting absolutely melted from them. You gotta remember, this is a 19 Tyrannical boss. These bosses will take a lot of teams 3 or 4 minutes to do on live, and these teams are just chewing through them with this comp, with this perfect corruption that they have on. And it's interesting to see from them. No deaths from Team Goosy Bad as well in this dungeon so far. We saw a couple deaths from our previous teams that did this boss, so good to see from them. These guys have been pretty clean so far.
Yeah, so after their 2 deaths they had at the very start, they were very clean afterwards. And those 2 deaths, I mean, maybe it was nerfed, it was the start of the dungeon, maybe something unfortunate happened. They definitely really recovered after it. And that's also one thing to note about the team. Sometimes if you have 2 deaths at the very start, maybe, you know, you're not in the right headspace anymore, maybe you start tilting or not playing that well anymore. But the Goosy Bat definitely didn't care about those 2 deaths that happened at the start. Played perfectly from there on out, had no more mistakes afterwards at all, so well done by them to recover from those first 2 deaths. And now we see those spider tanks go down very slowly.
Oh yeah, we talked about it earlier. That's the worst part of the dungeon to see, just cleaving 2 mobs down. Nobody likes to see that. The hunters are mad because they don't get their rapid reload resets. Everyone's mad because you're only killing 2 mobs at a time. The tank is bored. But of course you move on further into the dungeon. So at this point, what I'm interested to see is how close to Method and A in competition are we going to see Goosy Bad here, because Method and A didn't have the greatest time in their first run. They had like a 1746 compared to their 1553 in time trials. So if Goosy Bad's able to put together a good run here, you know, they could be a team that competes with Method and A looking forward.
Yeah, definitely. And their time trial time was 17 minutes, and it looks like they're on the right track to beat their own time trial time here, because we're still pretty far off of 17 minutes and they're already in this last boss area. They only have to deal with this trash, and then they're very likely engaging the boss with the awakened mob. So definitely on their way to beat their own time trial time and to compete with Method and Ace time as well, as you mentioned.
Oh yeah, I mean, these guys are absolutely crushing right now, and we're just now seeing Big Dumb Gaming getting to that third boss. I'm interested to see how they plan on pulling this. If we're going to see them stay in the Nihiloth realm while their tank goes out. Looks like, yeah, just looks like just the tank is going out while they set up. See Hypermage channeling that Ashara's trinket, that font of Ashara, and getting ready to hit that double on use combust. But wow, Bay is dropping incredibly low to the damage from this trash here. Looks like an explosive just went off as well, so these guys are in a little bit of danger here. Might have mistimed that combust, but you see it just now coming out from Hyper, and he had to run. His cauterized proc. He's not going to be able to get in his rune either. A lot of the damage from this mage is going to be neutered here. Without that 50% damage increase from the rune of power, it's just going to be bad. But look at all these explosive orbs that they're going to have to deal with as well. This is incredibly dangerous from them. But on the side of Goosy, bad.
Goosy bad. Yeah, they just had a full wipe coming in here. Unfortunately, they need to use a battle rest as well to get Hante back up, because Demon Hunter just does not have an out of combat rest, so they need to use that. He will get a mass rest off now to get everyone back alive. But yeah, I think they got overwhelmed by some of the explosives here. Didn't manage to deal with it anymore, and everything just went bad, and they just had a full vibe coming in. As now they are engaging the boss. They have the Bloodlust available, so they're popping it right now. They just need to deal with those Awakened mobs here, which is not very easy at all. Now, we've seen almost all MDI teams so far do these Awakened mobs with the last boss, and it seems simple when they do it, but there's so much control that we need to do. You need to, of course, this time we don't have the Wood Weaver, so we don't need the interrupts, but you still need to taunt the Spirit Breaker from the Tank Faster mob, because else your tank is just going to die, and you need to make sure you don't send in these pulls, because there's just so much damage from the boss on top of everything else happening at the same time.
And on top of that, you can see the mob that they're cleaving down first is that Fear mob. It puts out Fear debuffs on random players in the group. That's the scariest part as well, because if one of your important players, like a healer, gets feared, you're going to be in for a tough time. Of course, they do have Dispels to deal with that. They'll also have Revival to get rid of an entire set of them as well, so we'll have to see if that's going to be an issue for them, but it looks like they've got it down. And we were talking about this at the end of last dungeon. Ooh, never mind, once that Cryptix goes down, they're going to have to commit their final battle res to him if they're even able to get it off while all of this is going on. There's so much going on at this point in the dungeon, and the room is just completely filled with this purple goop on the ground. It's going to be hard to get that res off. It looks like they were channeling it just now, but they weren't quite able to get it off, or they were able to get it off, but he was waiting for that orb to move so he could actually safely take the res. It looks like they're totally fine here once they deal with this final Spirit Breaker mob. But we were talking about this before the dungeon at the end of last series. A lot of what this is making that mistake like we saw from Goosy Bad, but having the presence of mind to pull it back together, not tilt, and play a clean dungeon. And it looks like these guys have been doing just that. They made a major mistake. They wiped on their trash skip. But the Demon Hunter had the presence of mind to Shadow Meld, get out of combat, and be able to res the healer, albeit with a battle res. And then even then, Cryptix goes down while they're dealing with the trash, but they're able to stay calm, pull it back together, get the battle res off, and clean it up. And at this point, it's just, you know, a regular Tyrannical boss that they have to deal with. These guys are doing a good job of keeping it together, even though they've made mistakes.
Yeah, and it's crucial that they recover here, because a wipe on the last boss is a disaster, because not only did you commit the Bloodlust, and you killed the Awakened mobs, but the Awakened mobs actually respawn if you re-engage the last boss. Just because you killed them once with the last boss, they're not gone. They will respawn again. So you have to deal with all those Awakened mobs all over again, but this time without having Bloodlust, and maybe also missing some other major defensive/offensive cooldowns. So a weapon on the last boss, when you pull it with 3 Awakened mobs, is going to be a disaster. So good on them for recovering here, as they're about to finish off this first boss here, going into the second phase of this last boss.
And you know, the thing to remember is it is a Tyrannical boss, which can be a little scary when you're talking about King Mechagon. There's a lot of damage going out. You can see each of those blasts from the boss does, you know, a solid 60-70% of each player's health, not to mention the extra damage it does afterwards in the form of that dot. So you really have to keep an eye on the damage that they're taking here, and also keep an eye on that mana bar from Hunte as well on the Monk. He's down to like 20% mana. Those Awakened mobs taking extra time to kill because they had a DPS down really did a number on his mana bar there, so we'll have to keep an eye on them, make sure they're safe. But as long as they're not taking too much damage and they're using their immunities to help out with the damage intake in the form of Turtle, Netherwalk, and as well you could probably dodge them with Meta too on the side of Anarchy, they should be able to keep themselves pretty safe.
Yeah, and hunters are also known to not have as much mitigation as maybe some other class, like a Demon Hunter, of course, with the reduced magic damage and the Blur on only a 1-minute cooldown, and Netherwalk, and the Leech. Well, Hunters, on the other hand, they do have a little bit of self-healing, and they have Turtle, but outside of that, they don't really have that many defensive cooldowns, and that's why they really gotta watch out on this phase here, and they hope that they get a lot of those beams, as we just saw one of them on Hante, and you hope you don't get them on the Hunters and better get them on the Demon Hunter, because he's the one who's really tanky and can deal with that debuff a lot better than the Hunters.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the available, you know, self-healing or self-mitigation that the classes have, Hunter really is on the low end in terms of what it brings. You have Demon Hunter, which is just leeching itself during meta the entire time, and then you have Hunter, which can like Healthstone itself every 2 minutes with Exhilaration, and then it can like Aspect of the Turtle one cast of something, and then that's kind of about it. You know, sometimes they can throw out Spirit Mints as well, but you know, that's not really the most effective thing in the world. So yeah, like you mentioned, I think, you know, when you're doing a raid progression, right? I think the first class to always die to something is almost always a Hunter. That's just kind of their nature. That's what they are.
Yes, I definitely agree. But we see Goosy Bad not having any trouble with the incoming damage here on the Hunters, as Omega Vast is down to 6%. They're about to finish it off. Hunter actually managed to keep his mana at the same percentage now, and yeah, they're gonna be winning against Big Dumb Gaming here 2-0 after they finish off King Mechagon.
That's right, the final battle against the final form of King Mechagon, and Goosy Bad does take that quick 2-0 victory over BDG. And, you know, Dranos, we heard Zyronic say it as well, but we gotta emphasize it again. Being able to make up for those mistakes is absolutely critical, and we've seen twice now that Goosy Bad has been